April 1814. For 10 years, one man had dominated Europe: Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, thanks to his unmatched military genius. France had become a sprawling empire that cast its shadow across the continent. But now, the tide had turned. A grand coalition of his enemies had finally defeated him. Napoleon was forced to abdicate and was exiled to the tiny island of Elba. Meanwhile, the Bourbon monarchy was restored in France, with the corpulent Louis XVIII placed on the throne. But soon, rumors reached Napoleon's ears. The French people were not exactly enthusiastic about the return of the monarch nor the stagnation it brought with it. The luxurious excesses of the aristocracy clashed bitterly with the memory of the people's suffering, the very injustice that had sparked the French Revolution 25 years earlier. Meanwhile, at the Congress of Vienna, Napoleon's enemies, though triumphant, were mired in petty disputes about Europe's future. Napoleon saw his chance. After 10 months in exile, he decided to act. He returned to France, but instead of being captured, the soldiers sent to arrest him did the unthinkable. They rallied to their emperor. Man after man joined him. Moved by loyalty and belief, Napoleon once again raised the banner of war. At Vienna, the news hit like lightning. The coalition dropped their disagreements and declared Napoleon a criminal. Vowing to march on France once more, Napoleon had no choice. He had to act swiftly before the Allied armies could invade. He needed a quick and decisive victory, strong enough to bring them back to the negotiating table. His strategy: divide and conquer. His targets: Prince Blucher, leading the Prussians, and Duke Wellington, commanding the Anglo-Allied forces both stationed in Belgium. If these two armies united, Napoleon would be hopelessly outnumbered. So he had to act first, split them apart, and crush them one at a time. June 15, 1815, Napoleon's army crossed into the Netherlands near Charleroi, driving a wedge between the Allied forces. The next day, Napoleon sent his left wing, led by Marshal Ney, to seize the crossroads at Quaterbras. There, Ney encountered Wellington's army, still assembling and disorganized. Despite relentless French assaults, the Allied line held. That same day, Napoleon personally attacked the Prussians near the village of Ligny. It was a brutal battle, but Napoleon emerged victorious. The 72-year-old Blucher fought bravely at one point. His horse was killed beneath him, and he narrowly avoided capture. Though defeated, the Prussians managed to retreat in good order. Napoleon ordered Marshal Grouchy to pursue them and keep them from joining Wellington. Then, he turned his attention to the Anglo-Allied army. Wellington, only learning of the Prussian defeat the next morning, decided to retreat north through heavy summer rain toward a ridge 8 miles south of Brussels. Near the village of Waterloo, there he made his stand. He had received a promise from Blucher that Prussian reinforcements would arrive the next day. So Wellington dug in and prepared for battle. He chose his battlefield wisely. His troops were positioned behind a low ridge, shielding them from French artillery. The right flank was anchored at Hougoumont-Farm, the center at La Haye-Saint, and the left at Papelotte. All 3 strong points were fortified and garrisoned with elite troops. And Wellington needed every advantage he could get. Although both armies were roughly equal in number, his troops were a patchwork of British, Dutch, and German units. Many of them had never seen combat. They would have to hold the line against Napoleon's battle-hardened veterans until the Prussians arrived. Sunday, June 18, 1815. The morning dawned bright and clear. Napoleon ordered Grouchy to continue chasing the Prussians, keeping them from helping Wellington. Meanwhile, Napoleon would defeat Wellington at Waterloo and march triumphantly to Brussels. But Grouchy had been outmaneuvered. He was skirmishing with the Prussian rearguard, While the main Prussian army had already begun marching to Waterloo, Napoleon, unaware, delayed the battle to allow the muddy ground to dry a decision that would later prove catastrophic. At around 11 a.m., the first attack began. Napoleon ordered a feint assault on Wellington's right flank at Hougoumont. He hoped to draw Wellington's reserves away from the centre, but the Allied defenders, British and German, resisted fiercely. When French troops broke through the gate, it was slammed shut behind them and the intruders were massacred. Wellington later called it the decisive moment of the battle. By midday, 80 French cannons opened fire on the Allied lines. Though most of Wellington's men were sheltered behind the ridge, the bombardment still inflicted horrific losses. At 1:30 p.m., Napoleon launched a massive infantry assault. His columns advanced into a storm of disciplined musket fire and were struck by British heavy cavalry. The French attack collapsed in bloody confusion. Though the French had suffered a setback, the British cavalry charged too far ahead. Exhausted and overextended, they were counterattacked by French lancers and suffered a devastating defeat. Among the fallen was General William Ponsonby, commander of the Union Brigade. At 4 p.m. Marshal Ney mistakenly believed the Allies were retreating. He ordered a massive cavalry charge, but he was dead wrong. Wellington's infantry formed tight square formations, bayonets bristling in every direction. The French cavalry couldn't break through. They circled, fired pistols, and withdrew again, and again, only to be repelled each time. Ney's failure was due in part to a lack of infantry and artillery support. Meanwhile, the Prussians arrived. They captured the village of Plancenot, threatening Napoleon's right flank and forcing him to divert troops from the centre. By 6 p.m., the French finally captured La Haye-Sainte, the farm at the centre of Wellington's line. This allowed them to bring artillery closer and hammer the Allies at point-blank range. Casualties mounted. Wellington's army seemed on the brink of collapse, but Napoleon's situation was deteriorating too. The Prussians were arriving in greater numbers, and Napoleon had no more reserves left to hold them back. As a last gamble, he deployed his most elite unit, the Imperial Guard. They were Europe's most feared soldiers. At 7:30 p.m., 3,000 of these hardened veterans marched toward the Allied centre, but the British redcoats stood firm. They unleashed a devastating volley at close range as the Allies fixed bayonets and advanced. The Imperial Guard broke and fled for the first time in history. Napoleon's aura of invincibility shattered. Wellington saw the moment and ordered a general assault. At the same time, Prussian forces reclaimed Plancenot. The news spread. The Guard had broken. The Prussians were behind them. Panic turned to rout. The French army collapsed. Only the Old Guard, Napoleon's most loyal troops, held their ground, performing a heroic last stand. Napoleon himself was forced to abandon his carriage and flee. On horseback, narrowly escaping capture by the Prussians, the battle was over. Wellington and Blücher met in victory at Napoleon's former headquarters, a tavern called La Belle Alliance. Blücher suggested naming the battle after the tavern, but Wellington preferred a more English name, Waterloo. In Wellington's words, Waterloo was a damned close-run thing. It was also one of the bloodiest battles of the era. Over 50,000 men were killed or wounded, 23,000 from the Allied forces, 27,000 from Napoleon's army. With little medical care, many wounded were left on the field for days. Napoleon had been decisively defeated. With no army left to command, he surrendered to the British this time. They exiled him to a remote island in the South Atlantic. St. Helena. There would be no escape. Napoleon would die there. 6 years later, the Battle of Waterloo marked the end of an era. Europe entered a rare time of peace. With no major wars between great powers for 40 years, and Britain would not fight on the European continent again for nearly a century. until the summer of 1914, 40 years after the battle. The early pioneers of photography captured these incredible images, portraits of Napoleons. Surviving veterans, now old men in their 70s and 80s, among them Sergeant Tonyer of the Imperial Guard, Morat of the 2nd Light Cavalry, and Verline of the 2nd D.O. E.G.O. O.N.S. These faces are the living remnants of a vanished stage, the very last witnesses to the thunder of cannons, the clash of sabres, and the moment when the fate of Europe was decided at a quiet village called Waterloo. The Battle of Waterloo marked the final chapter of Napoleon and Bonaparte's legendary rise and fall. From triumph to exile, from glory to defeat, his story changed the fate of Europe forever. This battle not only ended an empire, but ushered in for decades of peace on the continent. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found it insightful, please consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into history's greatest moments. Your support means a lot, and we have many more stories to share. See you in the next video.